under the crystal chandeliers of an exclusive Napa Valley estate. My mother, Tiffany, stood at the mahogany podium. She looked radiant in her designer silk, her glass of vintage Cabernet catching the light like a trophy. She tapped the microphone, and the chatter of 40 high society guests died instantly. "I have a special announcement," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness as she looked directly at me. "We are here for Sloane's 30th. But it is time for the truth. Sloane was never truly our daughter. She was a strategic adoption. A $25,000 tax deduction. Richard and I used to secure our corporate benefits and a nice write-off. We did our duty. And now, our debt to her is paid." The room went cold. To my right, my sister Mackenzie did not look up from her phone. She just hit record and let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. I stood there, the designated spare, feeling 30 years of invisible labor and quiet obedience turn into a single, freezing realization. They thought they had just discarded a liability. They did not know I was the auditor who had already found the fraud in their foundation. Drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. Most people look at a family photo and see memories. I see leverage. I have spent the last 8 years tracking illicit funds for clients who prefer to remain nameless. So I know a shell company when I see one. And looking back, I realize my mother, Tiffany, was not raising a family. She was managing a hedge fund of human beings. For years, I analyzed her cruelty not as hatred, but as business strategy. To Tiffany, children were not people to be nurtured. They were assets to be diversified. Mackenzie was the volatile crypto asset. Flashy, unstable, but valuable for the public image. I was the tax shelter. I was the safe, boring municipal bond meant to sit in the background, offset the liabilities, and absorb the costs. She normalized the neglect because, in her mind, you do not waste resources on an asset that does not glitter. She thought she was a genius investor, allocating her love only where it yielded a return in social status. But she forgot the first rule of high-stakes finance. Always read the fine print. 30 days before, she tried to erase me at that podium. I walked into the law offices of Penhaligon and Associates. The waiting room was silent, smelling faintly of lemon polish and burnt coffee. Arthur Penhaligon, my grandmother Eleanor's attorney, sat behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from the hull of a ship. He was 80 years old and looked at me with eyes that had watched 3 generations of my family lie to each other. "Your grandmother did not trust the mail," Arthur said, his voice dry as paper. "And she certainly did not trust your mother." He slid a heavy, cream-colored envelope across the mahogany. The wax seal was already broken, the edges worn, as if Eleanor had held it many times before she passed. I did not open it with trembling hands or bated breath. I opened it with the precision of a surgeon. Inside, there was not a birthday card or a sentimental note. It was a dossier. First, the last will and testament of Eleanor Vance. It was dated 3 weeks before her stroke. It explicitly bypassed Tiffany and Mackenzie, leaving the entire Napa estate, the vineyard rights, and the $1.5 million trust directly to me. Second, a DNA test result from a lab in Switzerland. I scanned the data points, the percentages, the biological markers. It was the missing variable in the equation I had been trying to solve my whole life. Tiffany had called me a charity case, a random orphan they took in for a tax break. But the paper in my hands told a different story. I was not the stranger. I was the blood. I was the direct descendant of Eleanor's firstborn son. A man Tiffany had erased from the family narrative to secure her own position. I did not cry. Tears are just a biological response to confusion. And I was not confused anymore. I was clarified. I looked up at Arthur. He gave me a single, grim nod. I slid the documents back into the envelope and placed it in my bag. It was not just paper anymore. It was ammunition, and I knew exactly when I was going to fire it. 2 weeks before the gala, Tiffany launched what she called damage control. But what I recognized as a hostile takeover of my reputation. She did not just want me disinherited, she wanted me discredited. It started with the quiet, pitying sighs at the country club luncheons. She would lean into the wives of the vineyard investors, lowering her voice just enough to ensure everyone could hear. "Poor Sloane," she would say, shaking her head as she swirled her Chardonnay. "She has always been unstable. We have tried to help her with her finances, but she just does not have the head for it. We are worried she might make a scene at the party to ask for money. It is tragic." Really? I stood in the shadow of the doorway, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres like a good little servant, and listened to her dismantle my character. A younger version of me would have dropped the tray. I would have screamed, cried, and begged them to see the truth. But forensic accounting teaches you that emotional outbursts are liabilities. Silence is an asset. For years, people looked at me and saw a victim. They saw a girl who stayed in a house where she was not wanted, accepting scraps of affection like a stray dog. They called it learned helplessness. They whispered that I was trapped by an invisible chain of emotional abuse, too broken to leave. But they were wrong. I was not paralyzed by fear. I was paralyzed by patience. Staying was my strategy. If I had left at 18, I would have been just another estranged daughter with a grievance. By staying, by enduring the insults and the erasure, I gained access. I had the Wi-Fi passwords. I had the keys to the filing cabinets. I knew where Christopher hid the ledger for the offshore accounts. And I knew exactly how much Mackenzie spent on consulting fees for her failing influencer brand. I looked at Tiffany across the room. She was laughing now, touching the arm of the bank manager whose approval she desperately needed for a loan extension. She looked at me with a smirk, thinking her whisper campaign had neutralized me. She thought my silence was submission. She did not realize it was camouflage. I remembered when I was 12. Tiffany told me I was not allowed in family photos because my energy ruined the aesthetic. I believed her then. I thought I was defective. But as I watched her charm the banker, I did not feel the old sting of rejection. I felt the cold satisfaction of an auditor closing a file. I walked back to the kitchen, placed the tray on the counter, and pulled out my phone. I opened the secure app connected to the private investigation firm I had hired. The notification was green. The final piece of evidence had been verified. Tiffany thought she was setting the stage for my humiliation at the gala. She did not know she was building the scaffold for her own execution. Back in the ballroom, the silence following Tiffany's announcement was heavy, suffocating. She stood at the podium, triumphant, waiting for me to run. To her, this was the victory lap. She held out a document, a waiver, she called it, inviting me to sign away any claim to the estate for my own dignity. Ideally, we handle this quietly, she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. Sign this, Sloan, and we will even give you a severance package, $5,000, to help you get settled somewhere else. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at the crowd, 40 of Napa's wealthiest investors, winemakers, and socialites were watching. Their faces a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. Mackenzie was still recording, zooming in on my face. Eager to catch the first tear, I did not take the pen. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a simple HDMI cable. I walked past Tiffany, ignoring her confused glare, and plugged the cable into the podium's console. Behind us, the massive projection screen that had been cycling through photos of Mackenzie's brand flickered and went black. "What are you doing?" Tiffany hissed, stepping away from the mic. "Get down. You are embarrassing yourself." "I am," I said, my voice magnified by the speakers, calm and steady. "But before I sign anything, I think we should review the full audit of the estate. Transparency is key in business. Isn't it?" "Mother?" I clicked the remote. The screen lit up. It was not a slideshow of family memories. It was a balance sheet. The first slide was simple. Tiffany Vance, adoption record. A collective gasp ripped through the room. The document on the screen was old. The edges yellowed. But the seal was unmistakable. It was a birth certificate. But it was not mine. "You told everyone I was the charity case," I said, looking out at the crowd. "You told them you took me in out of the goodness of your heart. But that is not true. Is it?" I clicked to the next slide. A side-by-side comparison of DNA profiles. "This is a DNA test from the Swiss Genetic Institute," I explained, my tone clinical, like I was presenting a quarterly report. "It confirms two things. First, that I am the biological granddaughter of Eleanor Vance, born to her first son, whom you erased from the family history." I turned to Tiffany. She had frozen, her face draining of all color, her hand gripping the podium so hard her knuckles were white. "And second," I continued, "it confirms that you, Tiffany, share 0 genetic markers with the Vance bloodline. You were not the heir. You were the foster child Eleanor took in 40 years ago. You were the one adopted into this wealth." The room erupted. The whispers turned into shouts. Mackenzie lowered her phone, her mouth hanging open. "Christopher, my father, stood up, knocking his chair over, looking from me to Tiffany with wide, terrified eyes. You projected your own insecurity onto me for 30 years. I said, my voice cutting through the noise. You called me the interloper because you were terrified they would find out you were the one pretending. I did not stop. I clicked the remote again. The screen changed. Embezzlement audit. 2015 to 2024. Rows of data appeared. Red numbers. Wire transfers. Shell companies. You needed me to sign that waiver not because I am not family. I said, turning to look Tiffany dead in the eye. But because you needed to hide where the money went. $1.5 million. I said, letting the number hang in the air like smoke. That is the exact amount you siphoned from the estate trust over the last 9 years. You did not just steal from a grandmother who took you in. You stole from the future of this vineyard. The screen behind me was a wall of red ink. It detailed wire transfers to offshore accounts under Tiffany's maiden name. It showed consulting fees paid to Mackenzie for a social media strategy that did not exist. It showed jewelry purchases, luxury vacations, and a second mortgage taken out in my name. Fraudulently signed. This is a mistake. Tiffany shrieked, her voice cracking, losing its polished veneer. She looked around the room, desperate for an ally. She hacked the system. She is making this up because she is jealous. But nobody was looking at her with sympathy anymore. The bank manager she had been charming earlier was now staring at the screen, his face pale as he likely calculated his own exposure. The wives of the investors were whispering behind their hands, their eyes wide with the thrill of the scandal. I did not hack anything, I said, my voice cutting through her panic. I audited it. Every single transaction is verified, time-stamped, and traceable directly to your personal accounts. I looked at Christopher. He was slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. He knew. He had always known. And he had let her do it because it was easier than fighting her. You called me a tax deduction, I said to Tiffany, stepping closer to the edge of the stage. But the truth is, I was the only asset in this family that was not depreciating. You spent 30 years trying to convince everyone I was worthless so they would not look too closely at the books. You needed a scapegoat to distract from the fact that you were the thief. The silence in the room was not just quiet, it was judgmental. It was the sound of a reputation dying in real time. Tiffany looked at the crowd, then back at me. And for the first time in my life, I saw her truly afraid. She realized that the narrative she had controlled for decades had just been rewritten by the person she tried to edit out. This is my house, she whispered. But it sounded like a question. No. I corrected her. It never was. Tiffany looked at the projection of her crimes, then back at me. Her face was not just pale. It was the color of a balance sheet that did not add up. For the first time in 30 years, the mask of the untouchable matriarch did not just slip. It shattered. She looked small. She looked like a bad investment. Sloan. She stammered, her voice trembling, reaching out a hand as if to bridge the gap she had spent decades widening with dynamite. Please. We can fix this. I am your mother. I raised you. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I just looked at her with the detached curiosity of an auditor examining a fraudulent receipt. You did not raise me, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. You housed me. You fed me. You depreciated me. Those are business expenses, Tiffany, not acts of love. And now? The contract is expired. I signaled to the back of the room. 2 men in dark suits stepped forward. They were not the venue's security. They were private contractors I had hired 3 days ago. They moved with the silent efficiency of a foreclosure team. You cannot do this, Mackenzie screamed, finally finding her voice as the reality of her own poverty hit her. She grabbed Tiffany's arm, not to comfort her, but to use her as a shield. Mom, tell her to stop. This is our house. It never was, I repeated, as the guards stepped onto the stage. Tiffany tried to draw herself up, trying to summon the authority she had wielded like a weapon for decades. She looked at the crowd, expecting them to rally to her defense, expecting her status to save her. But nobody moved. The bank manager looked away. The socialites adjusted their shawls. They smelled the insolvency on her. And in their world, poverty was contagious. I stepped closer to her, lowering the microphone so only she could hear the autopsy of her life. Do you want to know why you lost? I asked softly. It is not because I am smarter than you. It is not even because I have the DNA. I looked her up and down, taking in the designer dress that she had bought with stolen money, the jewelry that belonged to a grandmother she barely knew, It is because you confused having with being. You thought that if you had the estate, had the title, and had the money, you would be the matriarch. You thought power was something you could buy, wear, or steal. But power is not a commodity. Tiffany, it is a threat. You built your entire identity on things that could be taken away. You are nothing without this house. You are nothing without the credit cards. You are a shell company. Impressive on the outside, but completely empty when you look at the books. Her lip quivered. The cruelty was gone, replaced by a terrifying vacancy. I had stripped her of her assets, and in doing so, I had stripped her of her personality. Please, she whispered, a sound so pathetic it almost felt wrong to witness. Where will I go? I reached into my bag one last time. I did not pull out a check. I did not pull out a settlement. I pulled out a single, thick envelope stamped with the seal of the Superior Court of California. I do not know, I said, pressing the envelope into her chest. She instinctively grabbed it. But you cannot stay here. She looked down at the document. That is a formal notice of a civil lawsuit for the restitution of $1.5 million, plus interest and legal fees. I said, I have already frozen the accounts you thought were hidden. I have placed liens on the jewelry you are wearing. You were a $25,000 deduction for me, Tiffany. But now, you are just a liability I am writing off. I turned to the guards. Escort them off the property, I ordered, and ensure they take nothing that belongs to the estate. Which is everything. Christopher did not fight. He stood up like a man in a trance and walked toward the exit, his head down. Mackenzie tried to grab a centerpiece, a crystal vase, but a guard gently removed it from her hand. She let out a sob of pure, spoiled frustration. And Tiffany? She did not scream. She did not fight. She simply collapsed inward, looking at the lawsuit in her hands as if it were a death certificate. The guards guided her down the stairs of the stage, past the tables of people she had spent a lifetime trying to impress. I watched them go. I watched them walk through the heavy oak doors and into the night. I did not feel happy. I did not feel sad. I felt the cool, clean sensation of a ledger finally balancing out to zero. 6 months later, the silence in the Napa Valley estate was different. It was not the stifled, suffocating silence of a house holding its breath, waiting for Tiffany's next criticism. It was the silence of a library, or a forest at dawn. It was peaceful. I walked through the hallways, my heels clicking on the hardwood floors that I now owned free and clear. I had stripped the walls of Tiffany's gaudy portraits, the ones where she was airbrushed into a royalty she never earned. In their place, I hung simple, black and white photos of the vineyard's original workers, the people who had actually built this place with their hands, not their lies. The legal cleanup had been swift and brutal. I did not drag it out. I treated it like a foreclosure audit. Tiffany declared bankruptcy 3 weeks after the gala. Her reputation in Napa was so toxic that she could not even get a table at a diner, let alone a loan from a bank. Mackenzie's social media accounts went dark after the comments section turned into a public tribunal on her entitlement. Christopher moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Sacramento and has not called me since. I do not wait for the phone to ring anymore. I walked out onto the terrace overlooking the vines. The sun was just cresting the hills, painting the valley in gold. But this was not a private playground for the elite anymore. Below me, a group of teenagers was setting up easels and laptops on the lawn. They were the first cohort of the Eleanor Memorial Center. I had transformed the estate into a foundation providing legal aid, financial literacy, and architecture scholarships for foster youth. Kids who had been told, just like I was, that they were a burden on the system. Watching them, I realized something profound about the nature of blood and belonging. For 30 years, I thought there was something wrong with me because I did not fit into the Vance bloodline. I thought my isolation was a defect in my DNA. But standing here, watching these kids build a future on the land my grandmother saved for me, I understood the truth. Heredity is just biology. Family is a choice. I had spent decades trying to twist myself into a shape that would fit Tiffany's expectations, breaking my own bones to fit into her narrow definition of a daughter. It was a waste of energy. The moment I let go of the need for their validation, the moment I severed that toxic umbilical cord, I did not die. I breathed for the first time. I walked back into my office, formerly Christopher's den of secrets, and sat at the desk. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a single photograph. It was the picture of my biological father, Eleanor's son. He looked like me. He had the same sharp jaw, the same watchful eyes. For a long time, I thought finding him was the happy ending. I thought proving I was real family was the victory. But looking at his face now, I realized that he was just a man. He gave me my genetics. But he did not give me my strength. I gave that to myself. I survived the cold. I survived the silence. I survived the erasure. I placed the photo back in the drawer and closed it. I did not need to stare at the past to know who I was. I turned my chair to face the camera. To face you, if you are watching this, and you feel like the outsider in your own life. Listen to me. I know what it is like to be the person who is interrupted at the dinner table. I know what it is like to be the safe option. The backup plan. The one who is expected to give everything and ask for nothing. I know the ache of waiting for an apology that is never going to come. You might be thinking that if you just achieve enough, if you just earn enough money, or lose enough weight, or become perfect enough, they will finally see you. They will not. They are committed to misunderstanding you because your existence challenges their narrative. But here is what I need you to know. You do not need their permission to exist. You do not need an invitation to your own life. You are not a tax deduction, a side character, or a mistake. You are the protagonist. And if the table does not have a seat for you, do not wait for them to bring a folding chair. Burn the table down and build a new one. I built mine. And the view from here is incredible. If this story reminded you of your own strength, please hit like and subscribe. Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. Remember, you do not need permission to belong. See you in the next one.